this is Victoria and this is my project, Metacognitive Reflections. So first, a bit about the problem I'm trying to address. I am trying to help scaffold student researchers to reflect so that they can become more self-directed and become better researchers. And the reason why reflection is important is that it is an integral step of the metacognitive process because it allows students to take a step back and evaluate their progress. Doing so increases self-awareness and helps students better understand how, why, and where they are struggling in the context of their research projects. So some of the research questions I've been asking are, is audio an effective medium for reflection? Can reflection be a social and collaborative process? What does good reflection look like? What does it really mean to be self-directed? And what makes reflection hard? So I've been doing some need finding throughout this quarter, and most students have reported that reflection seems like a daunting process for them because it takes a lot of time and effort, and they also do not feel like they know how to reflect effectively. In addition to that, I've found that users find it difficult to articulate their struggles, particularly to other people, which also hinders help seeking and is associated with some of the social discomfort and awkwardness that comes with asking someone else for help, which is also a hindrance to becoming more self-directed because oftentimes students aren't aware of their own blockers until they articulate them to someone else and receive that help. So the system that I have proposed in order to help scaffold student researchers to better reflect is through an oral reflections activity. So in the first step of testing out this process, I started out with a very general prompt. So the prompt is here. So I had students record on either their laptops or their phones. They recorded a 3 to 5 minute reflection about a time when they faced an obstacle in the context of their research project within the past week. If they can't think of any obvious blockers within that time frame, they were encouraged to tell a story about something they struggled with or that they're currently struggling with. So after users did this 3 to 5 minute reflection, I had them trade with partners in class, which was very surprising to most of the users because I had not told them that someone else would be listening to their reflection previously. And so during this process, after listening to their partner's reflection, each student had to record a 3 to 5 minute response to their partner. In this response, they could give advice or give an account of a similar experience or say anything they may have learned from listening to their reflection. And afterwards, they would do a post-reflection in which they listen to their partner's response to them and try to figure out if they learned anything from the experience. And I got some very interesting feedback from testing this model. I found that everyone had quite a strong reaction to doing this exercise because the idea of having someone else listen to their audio recording, and not only that, but also reflecting through audio was a very new experience and was awkward for some people, but also helpful in some ways, especially in developing awareness about a blocker. So some of the users responded in this doc, and I've highlighted some of the quotes. So this one user said he didn't actually think about his blockers until he made the recording, which is an indicator that he didn't take initiative to reflect on his mistakes. And through this process, we've identified that one of the important steps of having a metacognitive reflection is awareness of the person's blocker, because if they cannot show that they are aware of the obstacles they're facing, they often cannot talk about their process in depth. So some of the other takeaways are that when doing this exercise, people found it particularly rewarding to listen to someone else's reflection and give feedback, because they felt like they were giving the other person help, if they felt like they could provide advice, or they could also relate in some way or feel some sort of moral support or validation from their partner. And oftentimes partners gave some form of encouragement, like, you're doing well, or you can do this. So this user's main takeaway was that listening to her partner was, like, during the process of listening to her partner, she was appreciating how effective she was in overcoming her blockers, and she ended up spending her time telling her how cool she thought that was. In addition to awareness and moral support from one's peers in class, there also are certain limitations to this system. So this user found this model particularly challenging because he didn't realize that someone would be listening to his recording so soon, and he doesn't like sharing his feelings or thoughts. And because of his reaction to this method of reflection, he didn't feel like he could open up effectively and felt like he didn't go through his process and reflect as much as he would have liked to. And another user shared that they found listening to their partner's reflection fulfilling, but if they couldn't give good advice, they don't know if it would have been as effective. And on the other end, users have also reported that sometimes moral support is nice, but they want some sort of concrete takeaway from this process and get some sort of helpful clarification about the blocker they're facing. So after this initial test, I focused more on how to scaffold users throughout the first step, which was rather difficult because it was very hard to pinpoint what made reflection metacognitive and effective in terms of the self-regulation cycle. But what I found is that users benefited from having a scaffold like I have here, where I specified certain time constraints for how long they would talk about each subject. So the general prompt is still the same, and it gives users the freedom to talk about what they were doing throughout the week and develop awareness about their main blocker if they have not done so already. But this scaffold has proven to be particularly helpful because it balances talking both about the outcomes that they need to analyze from what they've collected throughout the past week and the process that they took and how well that was for them, in addition to planning for their next steps. So these time frames especially helped users make more effective metacognitive reflections, and I had very specific points in which users could talk about their metacognitive process. Like, for example, here I asked about their process to overcome the challenge, what worked and what didn't, and also I asked them to go in more depth about what they learned and if they made certain changes in their process and if that change was helpful and what changes they plan to make from then on. And in addition to that, if they realize that they acquired some sort of skill or self-knowledge through this process, they are also encouraged to talk about that. So after testing both the original prompt without the scaffold and the post-scaffolded prompt, right here, this first reflection is a reflection from a user before receiving the scaffold, and we found that it was very outcome-based, and the user did not seem to be very aware of their blocker at that time because the reflection focused more on describing the process, their project, which also made it very difficult to read. So on the other end, when the person had to respond, they thought the description was rather vague and they didn't really know what to say. So everything that's highlighted is what one reviewer thought could possibly be a metacognitive code based on a rubric that I had provided. And then after scaffolding, the original user provided this reflection, which was much more metacognitive, as you can see from the larger amount of metacognitive codes. And we thought it was particularly interesting because through this scaffolded reflection, he focused more on certain things that he could control individually rather than on external factors as he did in the previous reflection. And by focusing on what he could control, he could better evaluate the strategies that he applied and determine what his next steps would be and why those next steps would be helpful. So a little bit about the rubric that I've been developing throughout this quarter in order to measure how effective a reflection is. So the causal model I have highlighted here is the very first step is developing awareness about the blocker. And after developing that awareness, they can better assess the task at hand and then evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the process they took in order to overcome their blocker or make progress throughout their research project. After that, they evaluate their performance and strategies and try to figure out what worked and what didn't. Then they plan the next steps that they need to do in order to continuously make progress throughout their project. And after that is recapitulation, which has not been a focus of this quarter's research, but that is what I intend the partner's response to focus on, so that in a way, like, users reconsider what they went over throughout their reflection and see if their partner can help increase their awareness of their blocker or provide some form of helpful recommendation. So, and then I have a rubric here that further slices several reflections throughout the original causal model and this top row, and then I made further codes that kind of delved into subcategories for each of the sections in the top row of the rubric. And doing this was particularly helpful for me in terms of figuring out what a good metacognitive reflection looked like and the steps that were necessary. And I found that a metacognitive reflection incorporates every single part of the metacognitive process. So it's not just about reflection, it's also about self-monitoring and evaluation, and also planning to understand how the strategies they used in the past can be applied in the future. So in terms of some of the next steps that I plan on taking, I plan on creating a web app, and right here I have a sort of lower mid-fidelity prototype, I guess to say. So essentially, in order to facilitate the process of recording one reflection and then trading with a random partner and then listening to the partner's reflection and responding, I plan on building a web app. So here is a very simple interface to record audio, and as you can see, as my voice is going, the audio tracker is going, and then ideally the user would stop and save the reflection and then hit the button to send to their partner. Afterwards, they would be able to access their partner's recording and receive it directly. Right now, I'm just doing that through Google Drive. So in my folder, I have all of my recordings here that users can just access and pick out their partner's recording. But in the web interface, they would receive their recording directly. And in addition to receiving their partner's audio recording, they would receive a transcription, which users have expressed the need for that in case the audio quality wasn't great, or they may have missed something throughout the reflection, or they had forgotten, and during their response, they wanted to go back and see what their partner had said. Users reported that a transcription was particularly helpful for that. So I plan on using Amazon Web Services Transcribe to provide these transcriptions, and I already have tested the API for that, and it's proven to be pretty effective. So in terms of tech, it would be a matter of integrating it into my web app. So users would be able to receive their partner's recording with their transcription and then send their response to their partner, which would also come with the transcription. In addition to that, in the context of the web app, users would be able to see all of their previous recordings and transcriptions for those so that they can review and see how they have grown throughout this process. And in addition to that, some of the next steps that I need to address are, aside from building tech, figuring out measures to show that users become more self-directed through this metacognitive reflection process, and also better scaffold users so that they plan, and so that I can collect data to visibly show that they are becoming more effective researchers and hitting more of the points that they feel are necessary in the context of their project. So some of the next steps also include running a longer term study with the tech that I plan on building to see how users can grow metacognitively, because I also had this hypothesis that metacognitive growth sometimes comes over time, which is less obvious on a week-to-week basis. And I also hope to better scaffold users to make plans throughout their research project. Yeah, thanks for listening.